Charles asked me if I'd been practicing, and I said no, and then he looked at me and like, oh, really? And so I'm worried. But I've been changing the story around so much that I didn't practice it very much. Anyway, about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a very popular book. It had a worldwide sensation. It was called The Secret. And it was a book, and there was a movie, and Oprah got into it, and it was huge. It was massive. It was huge. And this whole thing about The Secret was that you could get what you wanted out of life by manifesting it, right? Now, manifesting was different than wishing, because wishing assumed implied you didn't have it. But manifesting was believing that it existed even though it didn't exist, right? And if you manifested this enough, it would happen for you. And I was a little skeptical about this because as a child, I was manifesting all the time. and I spent hours manifesting and didn't get much for it at the time. And one of my major manifestations was Darla Hood. I used to watch the Argane comedies every day, and immediately I zeroed in on Darla because she was gorgeous, and she had black hair, dark eyes, and a big smile, and confident. And I thought she was my age. I mean, they made movies in the 30s, so she was probably in her early or late 30s by then. But I figured, she's my age, and I developed these great manifestations about Darla, and I would, so Darla was going to come to my town, and she was going to walk up my street, and she was going to come to my school. She was going to be there somehow. And watching the Argane comedies, I'm glad Charles gave the background, so I didn't have to do that. But this kid Alfalfa was like her boyfriend, right? But the way that the sort of the stories played out is that he had to win her love every time that they did the show. And so the way he did this was he sang, right? And he was an awful singer. But it worked, and Darla, swooned and fell in love with him, and I thought, this is it. This is the ticket. So I developed this belief that if I sang, one day, Darla would be mine. Because she was coming, I mean, she's come from somewhere. So this lasted for 2 or 3 years. And then I sort of forgot about Darla, moved on to Annette Funicello. And I got a few years of that. And then I moved on to Real Girls, all the time keeping this music thing in mind, right? One day, it was going to, and I kept singing. I always sang to myself. I mean, that was my secret. I sang to myself, and not to anybody else. And because I was ready, right? But this never happened, right? And then I grew up, and I moved to Hawaii with a friend, and in no time at all I was there by myself. And I was there by about almost a year, and I met this girl named Christine Peterson. And Christine Peterson was, I really wanted to be with her right away. And she was different than the other girls that I knew, because the other girls I knew at the time were kind of hippie girls, and they didn't shave their legs, and they didn't wear makeup, and they had long straight hair, and they didn't wear a bra or anything like that. And I thought, Christine intrigued me because she wore makeup and lipstick, and her hair was done, and I hadn't seen that in years, And so I had given up manifesting, and I was into real action now. So my plan was to find some way to get to know her, and she told me that she was in a community opera group. So I joined, right? And we were doing the Desert Song, and it was a small opera company, so we all had to double our roles. So half the time I was a French Foreign Legion, the other time I was some, swarmy, Arab bandit. And then she was a harem girl, and then she was a French socialite, right? And I got a date with her, and she said, "Come over to my house, and we'll go from there." So I went over to her place, and she said, "How about some chocolate liqueur?" Which I didn't know existed. I mean, I didn't know liqueurs existed. And we drank that, and I got terrible gas. So my secret that night was that I was just blowing up, right? And, and really in pain. So Christine said, "Let's just stay here tonight, okay?" And she said, "My dad's coming home, but it's okay, he's cool." And her dad came in, and we talked, and she said, "Well, why don't you just stay?" And then the next day she said, "Well, why don't you just stay?" And then she said, "Why don't you just move in here with me and my dad?" Right? So I did, right? And her father, Pete, was one of these self-made millionaire guys who was working on his second million because he lost his first million. And he lost his first million in San Francisco. He and his wife had a real estate development company. And they got a divorce, and suddenly he abducted the oldest daughter and ran off in his yacht, sailed off to Tahiti, and waited there for a while for things to cool down, came back to Hawaii, and started his business again. But I could never figure out how he made his money. I mean, he never seemed to sell any houses, but he had a really nice house. But every time there was a knock on the door, they told me to answer it. Pete would run into the basement. No explanation from anyone as to why that happened. Okay, but it was okay. It was an interesting situation, and they were nice to me. So she said, "You've got to meet my mother." And her mother, whole family had moved over to Hawaii, right? And her mother was she lived very close to, almost down the street, on the side of Diamond Head, very nice area. But her mother was living in Leahi Hospital on the tuberculosis ward. So I said, "Sure, let's go over there," right? And I went over there. And mother was a really, down-to-earth person, and kind, and apparently her TB wasn't too bad, but she had to stay there for a few months. And then she said, "Did you tell Raoul that I had a famous roommate?" And she said, "No, I didn't tell him." And she said, "Well, I have a famous roommate." And I said, "Well, who is it?" And she says, "Do you know Darla Hood?" I said, "You're kidding me." I was in love with Darla, And she said, "Oh, she'll be thrilled to hear that, And so Darla was out for a while to get some tests or something, and then she came back, and oh my God, she was beautiful. I mean, and she was so pretty, and had such a nice smile, and so friendly, And so I asked her, "Wow," I said, "I was in love with you." She said, "Really?" She said, "I don't think anybody remembered me." I said, "Are you kidding? Everybody was in love with Darla Hood." So I asked her, "Do you remember much about that time?" And she said, "No. She was really small, and she doesn't remember much about making those movies. But she had a scrapbook, and she showed me the scrapbook, and she said, here's one where we were in a circus and firemen and so on." And then I said, "Do you keep in touch with the gang, right?" And she said, "No, I haven't seen the gang for a long time. I've had another life. I moved to Texas, and I married this guy, and he used to come by, a tall John Wayne type guy, And she said, the last thing I did was driving a school bus in Texas." And but she said, before that, I did a little bit of modeling, and she showed me some pictures of that and so on. And at the time, my girlfriend, knew that I was into music, and her mother asked, "Would you like to come to the hospital and perform for the ladies," right? There's a ladies ward, right? There's about 20 of them or so. I said, sure, well, that sounds great, right? So I went there, I think it was a Friday night. I had my Martin 12-string guitar, you know, and I've been working with this for years, so I thought, all right, I'm ready, right? So, sat down. At the time it was strange because I hadn't been to Japan yet. Everybody was wearing surgical masks, right? Except me. I was a singer, right? So, you know, I'm looking at this group of women. Most of them are sort of Asian, Polynesian, right? And they're all looking at me through the surgical masks. And I sing songs that I'm sure they had no idea what it was. It was Neil Young tunes and, you know, and Tim Buckley and that sort of stuff. And then suddenly Darla gets up and starts to dance. You know, before this, I mean, I had been deep into hippie mystical culture with all of that, chemicals and mushrooms and stuff. I knew a magical moment when I saw one. And this was it. This was the cosmos coming together for me. So, you know, I'm playing for Darla. She's up there dancing. I'm making her happy. Dream come true. Well, Chris dumped me after that. The whole thing with Chris was just an audition anyway. You know, really. She said that from the beginning, and she said, you know, I wanted you to move in because I wanted to find out who you were. You know, now that I know, I'm not interested. So, you know, goodbye. And but. You know, I felt really bad for a while, you know, but I got over it, and then I had this great story to tell. So every time, you know, I was with some people, and there was a picture of the R gang, you know, and a picture of, or we were watching on TV, and it came out. You won't believe I met her. I met Darla Hood, right? I played guitar for Darla Hood, and she danced for me. How about that, right? And that was my story until the internet was invented. So one of the first things I looked for was Darla Hood. Maybe I could write her an email, right? Say, do you remember me, you know? But the first thing I found was a gravestone. Darla Hood died in 1979. No information, right? Then, a little later on, when Wikipedia was up and you know you can find anything, I read about Darla's life. Darla died of hepatitis infection that led to a heart attack. Spanky from the Little Rascals said that she really died because she was so tired all the time, because she had married a guy who was in a wheelchair the whole marriage. Steiny said that she died of a broken heart. Darla Hood had been in touch with these people all her life. She had never been to Texas. She had never had tuberculosis. She'd never been to Hawaii. That woman was manifesting. Manifesting big time. Her husband believed she was Darla Hood, right? So, what a perfect match I had. There was me who manifested Darla, and there was Darla that manifested me. So now, today is our anniversary. Notice the black hair, the dark eyes, the big smile, but much better than Darla ever was. Thank you.
Thank you, Raoul. That was really well worth waiting for those two.